Tunisia's Jasmine revolution ushers in a new prime minister. His new protests call for faster change. Yemen's president calls in the army generals and orders them to defend the country's unity to the last drop of blood.
And the Oscar goes to Colin Firth, The King's Speech.
A fluent performance as a stuttering king sees Colin Firth crowned Best Actor at the Oscars. After nearly 42 years in power, Libya's leader Muammar al-Gaddafi is being backed into a corner from which he may find it impossible to escape. AlJazeera lies just 50 kilometers west of Gaddafi's stronghold in Tripoli. Its center is now controlled by anti-government protesters, but they're surrounded by troops loyal to Gaddafi. 3 more areas in the east are also reported to be under the control of protesters. As the standoff in AlJazeera continues, defections keep coming. An Air Force general at one of Libya's main bases says his men have joined the People's Revolution. Aircraft at Al Benin military airport are grounded. That could weaken Muammar al-Gaddafi's regime even further. We'll look at the international reaction to the crisis in a moment. But first, this report from Jackie Rowland.
The town of AlJazeera lies just 50 kilometers to the west of Tripoli. Now it has become a new front line in the battle between pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces. These pictures were shot by journalists brought here by the regime. The idea was to show the outside world that Gaddafi is still in control here. Instead, the reporters found that AlJazeera was in rebel hands, at least for now. The town is surrounded by pro-Gaddafi forces. Both sides are armed with tanks and anti-aircraft guns. Gaddafi's crackdown against his opponents has been the bloodiest and most ruthless in the wave of uprisings sweeping North Africa and the Middle East. But it doesn't seem to have stemmed the rebellion against his 4-decade rule. In the east of the country, opposition forces are welcoming visitors to what they are calling Free Libya. In the city of Benghazi, there are signs of a return to normal. Banks have reopened here and in the town of Al-Baida, both of which threw off Gaddafi's rule about a week ago.
The banks have been closed for 8 days, but thanks to our brave young men, they've managed to reopen in an orderly fashion. And praise be to God, everything is moving along smoothly.
And while residents stock up at the supermarket, the power vacuum that was left in the city is being filled. Local committees that are running towns and cities in the east of Libya have rallied behind a new leader, the former justice minister who resigned over the brutal repression.
What is happening in Libya is a popular revolution led by the youth, supported by the people against oppression and against a dictator who has led Libya with a singular point of view and with a vengeful attitude and bloodthirsty soul. Now we announce to the world that we intend to build a democratic nation with institutions that respect international obligations and treaties.
Libya relies on its oil fields. They're the mainstay of its economy. But now production appears to be grinding to a halt. This refinery is pumping 11,000 barrels a day, only 1/10 of what it would normally produce, according to the manager. The expatriate workers who used to man the plant have fled to escape the violence. Muammar Gaddafi's options are shrinking. Opposition forces continue to advance towards the capital, and the international community has imposed sanctions which further limit his room for manoeuvre. But the Libyan leader still shows no sign of being in the mood to surrender. Jackie Rowland, AlJazeera, Benghazi.
Pro-Gaddafi rallies are still being held across the country, though. Just outside the capital, Tripoli, government loyalists took to the streets, waving posters and chanting slogans. There were similar scenes outside AlJazeera, too. We have some amateur footage said to show Saif al-Islam. That's one of Gaddafi's sons rallying supporters in Libya. It's unclear when and where the pictures were taken, but in it, Saif al-Islam tells the people that enemy forces are spreading rumors. He also says security forces aren't joining protesters and that weapons would be provided to people ready to fight for Libya. Well, the Canadian and British Prime Ministers have joined calls for Muammar al-Gaddafi to step down. Their comments come as the US Secretary of State prepares for crisis talks in Switzerland. Hillary Clinton is due to meet other foreign ministers on the sidelines of a UN human rights meeting in Geneva in the next few hours. John Terrett is at the White House with more on the US reaction.
Nightfall in the United States and the emphasis on Libya now moves to Europe, where US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is attending a series of meetings on Monday at the United Nations Human Rights Council. Earlier, the Secretary of State had said that the US is reaching out to many Libyans, particularly in the east of the country, as the revolution appears to move west closer to Tripoli. She also revealed to journalists traveling on her plane to Geneva that the US is offering any kind of assistance to Libyans who might wish to consider overthrowing Colonel Gaddafi and his family. This is a ramping up of pressure on the Gaddafi family, and it comes now that the State Department is confident that most Americans who want to leave have left the country. That happened with the docking of the catamaran ferry in the port of Valletta in Malta at the back end of last week. Prior to that, they were very nervous about how many Americans were still trapped inside Libya. And that is why we've also heard from two leading senators, John McCain, a Republican, and Joe Lieberman, a hawkish independent, speaking in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, and calling for the immediate imposition of a no-fly zone over Libya, also calling for the White House to recognize the provisional government, which is clearly getting underway in Benghazi. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has also said that the US supports the aspirations and rights of the people of Libya, who she says are sending a very clear message that it's time for Colonel Gaddafi and his family to go.
Well, joining me now is Ibrahim Sharqiya from the Brookings Institute here in Doha. He's been watching developments very closely in Libya, I'm sure. Let's talk about the situation right now in Tripoli. How secure is Gaddafi's grip on the city?
It's certainly not on the entire city. We know that he is in Bab al-Zawiya, and Bab al-Zawiya seems to be very secure. He has his militia around him, and they are doing a good job protecting him. And he has even made some attacks outside the Bab al-Zawiya area. And yesterday we have seen some quietness in the city, so we can comfortably say that he is still in control in Tripoli, although there are some resistance in some areas. But I don't think we can talk about the city falling in today or tomorrow.
All right, I just want to read out a line that I'm getting here according to the New York Times. They are quoting sources as saying that US and European officials have been meeting to discuss the possibility of imposing a no-fly zone and taking measures to disrupt Colonel Gaddafi's internal communications ability. Now, how likely is it that we might see the US going for that sort of option, and how would it be received in Libya?
That's a good question, and we have seen John McCain and Joe Lieberman talking about the no-fly zone in particular and some other measures to pursue Gaddafi regime. The no-fly zone is certainly a good idea, although we have not seen an independent, credible evidence that al-Gaddafi has used jet to attack the protesters, but that doesn't mean that he will not. So no-fly zone is certainly a good idea, but I would like here to caution, actually, is about too much intervention in the Libyan revolution.
Could that actually backfire? Could it help Gaddafi?
Thank you very much. That's a great idea, because that is, we have to be extremely careful, and the international community and in the US in particular, because Joe Lieberman in particular is not a very popular figure in the Middle East, and there are a lot of reservations over Joe Lieberman. So with these statements coming from Joe Lieberman, this might really backfire, and this might end up helping al-Gaddafi, because also we have heard statements from the former justice minister in Libya this morning saying that he's rejecting completely and firmly any military intervention in Libya or any detailed intervention, too much intervention. So we should be really careful about where to strike a balance between what can really help the revolution and what can backfire and end up helping al-Gaddafi.
Do you think there are some steps that perhaps the international community might be tempted to make without too much worry, such as trying to help people stuck at the border, refugees, and trying to perhaps even recognize the rival administration that has been set up?
This is absolutely a good idea, and there are, unfortunately, because the situation is so difficult in Libya, and there are many areas where the international community can help. As we said, no-fly zone is one area, the refugees is another area. There are targeted, what I call targeted sanctions against the regime individuals. These are important measures and can really help the situation in Libya without backing fire. I would like to see some pressure coming out, especially from Europeans, individuals who enjoy good relationships with Gaddafi, in particular Berlusconi and Tony Blair, who enjoyed good relationship with Muammar al-Gaddafi in the past, is to pressure the Gaddafi, and through direct communications, through phone calls, because unfortunately the measures that are being taken in the international community, they're not really targeted, and they're not really helping in convincing the regime to give up at this point.
It's always good to talk to you. Ibrahim Sharqiya from the Brookings Institute. Well, Tunisia has a new prime minister. AlBaji Qaid Sebsi succeeds Mohamed Ghannouchi, who resigned on Sunday. Well, it follows renewed violence in the capital before his departure, as Nadim Baba reports.
A surprise announcement as Tunisia's interim president names a new prime minister.
At this critical moment, in order to maintain our national interest and to ensure that the state is up and running with all its institutions, I requested Mr. Baja Qaid Sebsi to assume the office of Prime Minister, and he thankfully accepted this responsibility.
AlBaji Qaid Sebsi is 84 and a former foreign minister. He served under Tunisia's post-independence leader Habib Bourguiba and under President Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali. His appointment came hours after interim premier Mohamed Ghannouchi unexpectedly stepped down.
I am not prepared to be the person who takes decisions which result in the loss of life.
The move comes at a tense time for Tunisia. Sunday saw new clashes between protesters and security forces in Tunis. Several people have reportedly been killed on the streets of the capital since Friday. Mohamed Ghannouchi took over as premier on the 14th of January after President Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia following weeks of protests. Critics say that since the Jasmine Revolution, there's not been real reform, and Ghannouchi's replacement is unlikely to change that.
He's out of touch, he's out of time, he's belonging other generation. What the Tunisian youth need today, who someone will be able to represent them, who someone will be able to respond to their legitimate demands.
Mohamed Ghannouchi has repeated the government's pledge to hold elections by mid-July. But almost 200 people have been arrested over the weekend. It's not clear how far the new Prime Minister can quell the anger on the streets. Nadim Baba, AlJazeera.
The Jordanian Prime Minister is now promising more political reforms. That's after the opposition threatened more demonstrations. It comes as supporters of King Abdullah gathered for a show of solidarity in the capital Amman. Protests have been ongoing in the country for weeks. Opposition leaders say the people are getting impatient with the slow pace of reform in the country. At least 6 people have been killed during demonstrations in Oman. That's according to staff at a government-run hospital. More than 2,000 protesters gathered in the industrial centre of Sohar on Sunday, demanding political reform. Police used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse them. The protests prompted the Sultan of Oman to introduce around 50,000 new jobs as he tries to stop the unrest. On to Bahrain, where the US President Barack Obama is welcoming government moves to reshuffle its cabinet to appease demonstrators. Thousands of people marched through the capital of Bahrain against the monarchy on Sunday for a third week. Protesters have rejected the king's appeal for dialogue and are calling for him to step down. Opposition parties in Yemen say they plan to join anti-government protests to increase pressure on the president to step down. This comes after President Ali Abdullah Saleh met his army generals as he tries to shore up his grip on power. Hashim Ahlabara reports now from the capital.
Remaining defiant, President Saleh telling his army officers that Yemen is in danger of disintegration and that they should fight for its unity.
We have vowed to defend the republican system, the unity and safety of the republic till the last drop of our blood, and this vow stands now. There is an attempt to split the country into north and south.
The president was referring to his arch rivals, secessionists asking the south to break away from the north, and the Houthis